and I am going to call up to the stage. Actually, we're going to swap microphones here, but I've got three guests or panelists that I'm going to invite up to the stage. The first being John Wickman with Cushman & Wakefield. John is a global real estate account lead for EnerSys. I'm going to have to ask you what EnerSys means, but we'll get to that, John. He's been with Cushman & Wakefield since 2011, and he had worked in construction and corporate relocation, and he is now on the multi-market tenant advisory services team. Yeah. Yes. And he's helped complete transactions totaling more than 10 million square feet. So he's been active in a lot of stuff. John has been a real help to our association. We've had several member deals where either people are looking for a new facility or they're looking for help, and he's helped us find real estate space and do other things. So we're grateful to have him engaged with us. Is Chuck Palmer here from Michael Best? Is he not here yet? It's unusual to not have a panelist, but we don't see him. All right, well then, Sam, you're the next one. Sam Martinez. He's our Vice President of Modern 4PL Strategies. We're going to talk about what that means with Redwood Logistics. He's worked in the industry for over 15 years, and he started as a sales rep for Command Transportation back in 2009, and he's worked his way through, joined Redwood back in 2019. And so in this role, we're going to talk about what he does in that role here shortly. My hope is that Chuck makes it shortly because he's supposed to be here. So, but all right, I'm going to move this out of the way, and we're going to have John lead off. He's got a little presentation he's going to share for us.
Thanks, Jason. Great to be here with you guys today. MWFPA, great association, doing a lot of great things. Guys in the back have a couple of slides, I think, queued up. So think of it, and if Chuck gets here, great. We can also talk a little bit about labor and some of the things that are impacting there. And both Sam and I have a little insight on that as well. Obviously, Chuck being the expert on that. And then Sam from a logistics standpoint. Oh, it's up there. Can't see it from there. Oh, there we go. I was like, I'm looking at a beautiful scenery here. So love this, and these slides will be totally available for you guys. One of the things that our firm does a great job of is putting together data and analytics, and put it out on a quarterly basis, do some great forecasting, do some specialty reports having to do with logistics, having to do with things around the ports, that sort of thing. But I love the title of this slide, Size Matters. And in this case, it's demonstrating that what's been really difficult, and I'm sure some of you here in the room, if you've been looking for space or know about the markets that have been out there, particularly the last couple of years, the smaller spaces have been very difficult to find. There's an abundance of product in some of the larger spaces, and as demonstrated here, under 100,000 feet, that's been definitely at a premium, and we see that trend continuing at least for 25 and into the first part of 26 as supply starts to catch up. As you guys know, it takes some time from going through the entitlement process and finding the land, getting these buildings up. It's at least a 9 to 12 month process just to get a shell and core, not to mention for those of you here in the room that have any specialty type needs on those buildings, you're just going to continue to extend those timelines out. Awesome. So I wanted to feature and talk a little bit about the Midwest rents here, particularly for those of you in the room. And know that, one of the great things about the Midwest is it's still a very good value relative to the market in terms of rates and what you're going to be paying from a lease perspective. As you see here, even at where we're trending up to now, just at over $6.50 a square foot, you see it's been a pretty stable rise to this point. One of the slides I'll show you in a minute shows the coast and some of the other kind of core competency markets, those numbers pushing $20 a square foot. So when we talk about value in real estate, it's still here in the Midwest. It still is a great place for you to look to be expanding operations, or as you're talking to the partners you work with who'd be wanting to get near you guys from a supply chain standpoint, definitely the Midwest is still a high value there. Here's a very detailed slide with a lot of dots, and you see here featured in the green, these are kind of some of the Midwest markets. Again, you see on the right-hand side of the screen, that's where they are. You see over the left-hand side, because of where those rates are, as I mentioned, over $15 a square foot, whether that's in the New Jersey or Southern California markets, those sort of things. Just showing that the growth of the rents has definitely been a lot more stable in the Midwest, and we see that continuing in the foreseeable future. Again, Midwest still better than the rest of the nation. One of the things we're going to get into and talk a little bit about today, and it's not really highlighted here in the data, but the change, and again, Chuck's not here, but for 10 years, all of our discussions have been with workforce, with labor, with people. We're seeing a definite shift right now to looking at where power is available as electrification goes, doing more things in smaller spaces, back to my point about looking for smaller buildings and things like that. Having to make up for the shortfall in availability of labor, companies have had to innovate, and by innovating, they've also created more processes that require more power, not to mention what the impact of AI is having, not to mention the impact of what drives the AI, which is the data centers. What drives the data center is water and power. So it's a trickle-down effect. So if you think about a data center moves into your area, that's great from a perspective of it adds a lot of base rate in terms of energy consumption and things like that, but it also takes away that power from the grid that you may need to, whether that's new equipment, whether that's electrification of what you're doing, that sort of thing. So again, rents we see moderating. This is kind of the punchline in the final slide that I've got. If you've been in the market, if you've been looking for warehouse space, you've been looking for manufacturing space over the last couple of years, one, it's been difficult to find. The pace at which you're going to had to move was very quickly, but we see that slowing. I describe it this way: we've been going at 140 miles an hour for the last couple of years. We're slowing down to 95. But we're still doing 100 miles an hour. So you still have to be prepared. You have to be, get yourself organized and be ready to react to the markets.
All right. Sam?
Hey, everybody. Good morning. I'll wait for my slide deck to be pulled up.
Tell us a little about Redwood Logistics.
Yeah, don't mind doing that. So my name is Sam Martinez. I'm at Redwood Logistics. We are a modern 4PL. Really, my role day to day is to understand our existing clients as it relates to what their supply chain objectives are, what challenges they're facing as it relates to their logistics networks or their supply chain technology. Today, I will be presenting on what is a modern 4PL exactly, and how is that different than a 3PL, which I'm sure you've all heard of, and really give some insight into a case study with Taylor Farms, one of our flagship clients, on how a partnership with the 4PL can really help support digital or supply chain transformation. So today, Redwood is a $1.5 billion logistics company. But we started as a Chicago brokerage back in 2001, and our path to becoming a 4PL is really just a story and an evolution based off our customers' needs and always trying to provide additional value to them. And in 2004, we launched a managed transportation division. I'm sure some of you work with managed service providers out there. And we also launched a proprietary TMS, or a transportation management system. And as those services matured, we realized the complexities involved with system integration. So our TMS was really delivering the value as promised to our clients, but connecting that TMS to all of the warehouse management systems and the order management systems out there, all those different carriers at scale, became increasingly difficult. And so we made a strategic decision to become a system integrator in order to deliver technology more efficiently for ourselves and, of course, for our customers. Gartner would define a 4PL, somewhat of a new category, as a logistics company that can really manage the end-to-end life cycle of a supply chain. And this goes beyond the tactical or operational day-to-day execution like a typical 3PL might offer, because of our ability to manage and orchestrate system implementation and integration. And the supply chain really consists of two major components is how we see it. The physical supply chain, which are your farmers or your suppliers, it's your processing plants, your manufacturing sites, your carriers, and of course your customers. And then you have the digital supply chain, which are all those different platforms and systems that are used day to day in order to execute on that business. The amount of supply chain technology out there today is not slowing down. Sure, you have your TMS, you have your WMS, your ERP, your business intelligence tools, your finance tools, and the list goes on and on. And so we decided that we wanted to be able to offer an open ecosystem to these shippers and enable to seamlessly integrate them to all of these different partners and systems in order to give them real-time visibility into what is farm to retail or access to clean and accurate data in order for those clients to mitigate risk, increase profitability in their supply chain, and really boost their efficiency. And so how do we do all this? Well, we established and built a proprietary middleware called Redwood Connect, which is really a software exclusively designed for supply chain that helps these shippers enable integration between the physical and digital worlds of their supply chain. So today, Redwood's really evolved. We now are a top 15 North American freight brokerage. We have $450 million in freight under management for that managed services division. We have 13 offices across North America, 3 of which are in Mexico for our cross-border logistics strategy. And we're strategically partnered with Oracle and MercuryGate. And we're one of the industry's top system integrators. And we performed over 400 TMS integrations to date. And so what that means is that Oracle and MercuryGate, they sell software. They rely on us in order to implement that software, and so their customers then become our partners as well. And just given where the market and the logistics landscape is at, all of the consolidation that you see going on, we feel like we're in the really early innings of the ball game still, despite being in business for the last 23 years. So let's look at a case study with Taylor Farms. It's one of North America's favorite fresh salad and food manufacturers based out in Salinas, California. Their products are in virtually every grocery store today, and their cold chain supply chain represents $400 million in transportation spend. And when we first started talking to Taylor Farms about 10 years ago, the conversation was really around connecting their WMS that they had, their warehouse management system, and their ERP. But they were also considering implementing a TMS, because at the time, they were doing everything really manual. All these different locations were working siloed, had their own processes, and they realized the value of a TMS would be able to consolidate and really optimize what they had going on with the supply chain and give them a view of what was really going on. That's what we did. We implemented MercuryGate and gave them that best-in-class TMS, and we connected the WMS and ERP through that system. And then we gave them connectivity to all of their carriers. So all of that manual work and that communication over email now was automated and flowing through the TMS. So the status updates, the track and trace, the paperwork, the freight pay and audit and settlement now was all flowing through MercuryGate. And I think at that time, Taylor Farms realized the ease of implementation, working with the Redwood, working with the 4PL, and accelerated their efforts on digital transformation and started to create an open ecosystem of technology for themselves. So first they wanted increased temperature control monitoring at the warehouse and trailer level, so we implemented Locus Tracks for them. Then they wanted a uniform dock scheduling platform through all those facilities, so we implemented Smart Dock. And then they wanted better yard management of those trailers going in and out and those geofencing applications, so we implemented Yard Commander for them. And so what were the results of our partnership? Well, they saved 2% overall at $400 million transportation spend. They saved 2% on mitigating claims and reducing risk with the temperature control monitoring. They saved an additional 3% using the logic built in the TMS and really optimizing how they were shipping all those truckloads out. It's all refrigerated truckload. And so they were able to really gain a lot of efficiency, meaning shipping a lot more product out using less trucks. They saved 11% per pound by aggregating all those load volumes now with all those different locations. And so they were leveraging that buying power with all their carriers, lowering their transportation spend. And I think what's most impressive is that they increased their freight under management by 103% over the course of like 6 years, because they were more competitive, they were more efficient, they were automated, and they were just buying better than their suppliers and taking on more lanes from their customers they had ever seen in the past. And I say all this to really close, as I close here, 2 major points. One is that, as I've learned from all of you here at the show, all of you are on your own digital journeys as it involves technology, typically at the warehouse level. It comes in all sorts of ways. It's a really competitive space. But to scale technology to get the efficiency and the ROI for your teams, you have to be able to connect those teams. And really, it's been an IT function for a long time. And what we've seen at Redwood is that it's really becoming a supply chain function. And so how we're assisting shippers out there is not relying so much and putting the burden on IT and really enabling the logistics team to do it themselves. And second, I think it's important to understand Taylor Farms was kind of the captain of their own ship here. They're the ones that had the vision. They're the ones who realized the competitive landscape of the food and beverage industry, and they just wanted a best-in-class supply chain, and they wanted to establish the open ecosystem of supply chain technology, and they just saw Redwood as a partner and vehicle to kind of get them there over time. So, thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Is this? I might actually need your mic.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one behind you if you want to grab that one. Well, I did neglect to mention that Redwood has been coming to convention since I came here in 2019, and Steve Rose, who's with the group, he was with me in the alternative to the cigar tent last night, the cigar gathering, and anyway, it was just great to visit with him, and it's been neat to have you guys help our members out with freight solutions for some time now. So now, when we were talking in advance of today, it was interesting, the theme that came up that was so different between, these guys are in very different areas, and then the safety and HR attorney, and it was interesting that the common theme of topics that we talked about, which is funny to reflect, two of our keynote speakers here yesterday spoke about AI-related things. Yeah. And these guys started talking about how AI is changing real estate, and you heard a lot from Sam about freight, and it was true of the labor standards as well. So I'm going to start with John and just ask, automation, what are you seeing the impact on site selection and decision making as it relates to real estate?
Yeah, as I hit it, talking about the data, just seeing this ability to do more in smaller spaces, right? So, and also being creative and unique. Looked at a project in the Dallas area not that long ago, and this particular was in the pet food industry, manufacturing facility, and part of that was that design was a 120-foot clear dark warehouse. So you talk about impact of technology and things like that on the business. I mean, that just blew my mind. In our business, I'm sure those of you that know kind of the modern buildings of 24 to 40 foot clear heights, kind of the standard kind of warehouses that you see along the highways being built nowadays. But to think about that 3 times higher than that, and it was going to be just all run through robotics, I thought was really fascinating. And then I think that the impact of AI, just in terms of being able to do things, smarter, faster, and being able to focus more, on the customers, on the core of what the business is, and letting some of those things that are non-core, be automated. Is I think it's taking a great, tried and true traditional business practice and just making it go faster.
So, Sam, a little bit different question for you. I wanted to ask you about clean data, because there's a lot of data out there, but that doesn't mean it's really feeding, and you guys must encounter this, where you have to cut through the noise, the clutter, if you will. And so how are you seeing shippers organize and manage that data, clean data, in real time?
Yeah, I've been to several conferences this year, and a couple of them were really technology focused, and the overwhelmingly common theme when we interact with shippers, especially some of the leaders of the supply chains, is how can I access clean data? You know, we have all these different systems, we have all these different partners, and nobody be able to seem to deliver the data and the reporting that we need, because all of them want to hire these data analysts and infuse AI or these different applications, but it's only as good as the data in as the efficiency and data that you'll get out. So clean data is becoming a very valuable currency within supply chain, because it really is true. Like, in order to stay competitive, whether it's in the food and beverage industry or aerospace or auto manufacturing, the more efficient you can become for your people and your processes is as good as the data that you have access to. And so what I presented here with Taylor Farms is these systems are all available now, but you can only have success implementing them and getting the ROI out if the data going in and out is accurate.
When I hear you say that, and I visit a lot of these processing plants that these guys represent, and it's always interesting to see, sweet corn going through, and they're always trying to recover. They're trying to remove the stuff that shouldn't make its way through, but they also want to recover the good things before it goes to waste. And I think, here it's become a pretty automated process, and yet you're doing the same thing. It's just with data.
Yeah, and as it relates to this industry and what I've heard and having a few great discussions yesterday at breakfast in particular with somebody from Red Gold, is you realize that all of the fresh produce has to be scanned in, because on the back end, if there's an issue, litigation, lawsuit, just safety in general, you have to be able to trace that back to a particular farm. And in this case, the Red Gold, they knew exactly which section of the farm it was coming from. And that all happens at the warehouse. And so it's just enabling your carriers and your suppliers and your farmers to just, be able to serve, the end customer so much better.
Traceability, we all have to do it. Yeah. So, John, we're going to go back to you. Wanted to ask you about our member companies when it comes to managing available space and the pricing that goes along with it. What should they be thinking about, have in mind?
Well, I think the data that shared up there, if you're in the upper Midwest, again, like I said, it's a very good value for what you're doing. I think that if you're looking at a new project, or even if it's just a renovation of your current space or a little bit of an expansion, I think getting your partners lined up early in that process, and that's used to think partners, and you think about real estate, and you think about your architect, you think about your engineering firms, you think about your contractor, that sort of thing. But there's whole other layer of that. Again, this impact of mentioned and talking about relative to availability of power. So it's engaging with your utilities, it's engaging with the economic development folks. It could be your chamber of commerce, whatever it happens to be, because whether you're doing this expansion on your site as it sits today, or you're looking for a net new location someplace else, aligning those partners. I don't even want to say it's beyond critical. You have to do that today, otherwise your projects are just you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle with timelines. You're going to struggle with cost, and even just again availability of power. I mean, we did a project, advanced manufacturing. And everywhere through that, even though we had done this process, aligned with everybody, utilities sitting at the table giving us a thumbs up, yeah, we're going to have no problems. Everything's going to be good. Then it came down to it, and they said, oh, you were serious about that much power. Really? We don't have that. We're going to have to work with you on how we work in phases to get there. But again, it made sense. And we were able to do that by putting together a schedule and a program, by taking it from just, hey, we need all this power on day one. We can phase it over time, still meet the timelines, help the construction teams get what they need. So, it's a long answer to your question, Jason, but I think that would be, the one thing that I would say.
One follow-up on that, John. So I was in, Chuck is here. Come on up.
Hi, Chuck.
Chuck has arrived. Just to finish that thought, I was in Eastern Washington in September, and here I'm visiting some of our seed company members and some food processing facilities there. And some of these towns, they have abundant water from the Columbia system, and there's a bunch of these data centers that have sprung up in where there's very few people living there, and that was a surprise. I know from my prior job working with Progressive Rail in Elk Grove Village, closer to where you guys are. A lot of data centers were springing up, displacing industrial buildings that we were hoping to fill with customers. And you just see that trend. You've got the big announcement of Microsoft coming to the, what's their name? The campus outside Racine.
Foxconn.
Foxconn, thank you. My hometown, I should know that. Anyway, it's a lot driving, and it just really makes, there's a lot of questioning among our membership about, geez, are we going to have the power to do what we need to do?
Well, it's power. It's that whole pieces around it. So you talked about water that's impacted there, the availability of equipment that could be things that you need to get, whatever you need to get to your building, or at least get to the park that you might be going into. So again, that's why what I just said, with aligning with the partners, particularly the utilities, the economic development folks, these cities, to when you're thinking about something, absolutely crucial to success.
All right. Well, Chuck Palmer is here. So Chuck is a labor attorney with Michael Best and Friedrich. I can remember back to 2019 when I started. I forget the issue, but we were right away engaged with him, trying to come up with a solution or how to manage a situation with our members. We talked a lot more during COVID, where we had those types of issues arise. And Chuck, it's good to have you with us.
Thank you.
He's been with Michael Best for, I don't know if it's 30 years you've been with them. It's been doing a lot of OSHA work during that time, right?
25, right?
25. Okay. So we're grateful to have him. I think you're probably a commodity with a number of. And do we have his presentation? Can we pull that up? No. Okay. So, all right. Gotcha. So,
I can cover it.
You could talk about it? All right.
Sure. Yeah, sorry I'm a little late. Speaking of power, I had a power outage last night and didn't realize I was out, and so alarm didn't go off. Anyway, glad to be here, and I'm just going to do a quick kind of update on labor issues, and that's kind of my area, OSHA, labor law. And I don't know if you saw last week the announcement that President Trump nominated the Department of Labor Secretary. Her name is Lori. It's a hyphenated last name, and I'm blanking it, but she's a Republican from Oregon, and it was a bit of a surprise for many on the conservative side of the aisle, because she co-sponsored a couple of different bills. One is called the PRO Act, and that law would allow elections in a much easier way from a union standpoint to collect cards rather than secret ballot elections, and all kinds of things that were a bit controversial, and there have been efforts on the Democratic side to get through Congress for, since the beginning of the Obama administration. So she was a co-sponsor of that, as well as a co-sponsor of a similar bill that would allow a much greater ability to organize unions among public sector. So we'll see how that goes, but you look at Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters Union, spoke at the RNC convention in Milwaukee. Trump campaigned on a very pro-labor sort of approach. So you got some, they say politics makes strange bedfellows, and it's an interesting thing that the highlights have been a lot of the controversial picks on the Department of Defense, FBI side of things. You see a lot of media on that. I didn't see a lot of media on this Department of Labor pick, but it's significant. And so, when I started to prepare this presentation for today, I talked about the fact that Jennifer Abruzzo, who's the head of the National Labor Relations Board, would be out for sure. She's been very aggressive in terms of labor issues. There's a case called the CMEX decision that basically says that if you, as an employer, commit an unfair labor practice during an election, a union election, that you can be ordered to recognize the union without a vote. And that was a pretty sweeping decision. And my PowerPoint basically says CMEX is out. And I'm not so sure, based upon this pick, exactly how that's all going to play out. So, from a union management standpoint, it's yet to be determined. The other question we get a lot right now is on immigration, and what's going to happen with immigration. The president campaigned on, deporting 13 million people not here legally, crossing illegally. Is that going to happen? No, it's not going to happen, but there will be some. And, our immigration practice is pretty broad. We've got about a dozen people processing immigration activities throughout the year. And, they're sort of, hey, we don't know exactly how it'll play out. So the one piece of advice, though, is that you need to look at your I-9s. You need to audit your I-9s. That's the tip of the iceberg, the point of the spear. If you are audited, they're going to come in, and if they look suspect, it's a question of should you have known. Now, we all know, in many workplaces, you've got people that are working that you have some question about whether they're legitimately here or not, but you can't really discriminate on that basis of suspicion. But the big issue is, how do you intake them? What's the I-9 look like? Does it look like you legitimately brought this person in not knowing that they were illegal? They may have the wrong papers or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're illegal. So it's really just making sure that your paperwork's in order, because that's what's going to open the door for further audits and potential penalties and deportation. So that's the one takeaway, is make sure your I-9 audits are in order. From an OSHA standpoint, again, this is the Department of Labor that is regulating, OSHA, and depending upon who the pick is for the head of OSHA, some of these things may or may not happen. The heat rule was the big one, and that was the comment period was supposed to close on that heat rule on December 31st. They just extended that for 3 weeks, so there's still time to comment on that heat rule, but it's a sweeping thing that would basically govern things like clothing selection. Like when you hire a new employee, you have to give them a certain period to acclimatize, a certain quantity of water available for people on the job, certain number of rest breaks. And so people complain about not having enough breaks or enough water or not the right clothing. Those are the things, the type of things they can complain to OSHA that might trigger an OSHA inspection. So we'll see what happens with that heat standard. It's a pretty sweeping thing. My bet is that it doesn't get through, just based on Trump's, the things that Trump threw out last time he got elected. I think it's not going to be in place, but again, we've got a pro-labor secretary that's coming into place, so it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen with that. One thing that's for sure is that the wage and hour regulations, in July, we had an increase in the salary threshold from $35,000 to about $43,000 was the threshold beyond which you didn't have to pay overtime if the person met all the tests for being exempt from being an hourly employee and exempt from overtime. That number moved from 35 to 43, and then it was going to move again to about 56 to 58,000 as of coming up January 1. That has now been vacated by a federal judge in Texas. It has been appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, but the odds makers in Vegas suggest that it's not gonna get overturned. There are a number of reasons for that. I won't belabor that point, but the bottom line is I think that wage change from the 35,000 is probably not going to take place. Now, where does that leave you if you actually raised salaries to meet the 43,000 that took place in July? And that's a difficult decision. Do you lower people's wages back down? And I think most employers are not going to do that with inflation and everything. But the advice now is hold where you're at this point, unless you're planning some kind of a increase anyway. So those are kind of the things that are going on, and there's some other case law that's been decided by the Supreme Court that's pretty sweeping this past year that's going to change a lot of what happens in the administrative litigation. So it's probably one of the most unique times in my career, over 34 years of legal changes that have happened. So it's going to be an interesting year.
I'm glad you touched on the heat illness rule, because we had to negotiate a state-specific one with the Department of Workforce Development for seasonal workers this past year, and that was we got it sunset because we were anticipating the federal government adopting one. And then the feds come out with their version, and it's not just outdoor agriculture workers, it's indoor plant workers, which we have not had a standard for that before. And I don't know. So I guess we'll see what they do, right?
Yeah, I think with the comment period being after the president is elected, we're going to see it probably, if they hold off or they extend that even further, I should say after the inauguration, they may extend that further. My guess is we wouldn't really see a final rule until toward the end of 2025, if that even happens. So I think you can kind of hold pat. But, OSHA's still inspecting people based on their general duty clause related to that. So some of those things that are in there are, they're looking for that poster child case to say this is why there should be a law. So, I encourage everybody to sort of look at those and be careful, because you don't want to be the poster child where they hit the $1 million fine for somebody dying because of heat, and then they use you as the example of why we should have this law. So that's not good publicity for a food company.
All right, so Sam, I'm going to go back to you. And you shared a bit about a 4PL and what that is. And I guess I wanted to ask, what would the market dynamics be that influence allow shippers to grow in the 4PL area?
Yeah, I think in the manufacturing sector, volumes in general have been down. Domestically, manufacturing's been down. We see that kind of across the board, affecting every industry for various reasons, policy, election year, et cetera. But the markets are coming back, and I think there's a lot of excitement out there for an influx of cash. Interest rates hopefully be able to come down, and all of these other indicators that will lead to an increased freight market, nearshoring now, bringing things back to the U.S. and, of course, into our neighbor in Mexico, all of which allow for shippers to really understand, okay, if the market's coming back, which means the landscape's going to get more competitive, which will typically mean freight rates or transportation costs start to go up. How are we going to mitigate costs? How are we going to sustain competitive nature and keep costs low? That's a really big, challenging topic right now for manufacturers and within the supply chain. And that's why I hit on so much on the technology side, because that's where it's going to come from. Freight costs are going to go up. We've had 2.5 years of really a freight recession. And as those things come back and costs start to increase, you got to look at other ways to be able to infuse automation. I know the labor markets have been really tough, and increasing labor rates also affects supply chain and the cost of the final consumer. So it all just means, like, how are you going to stay competitive? And I just think that there's a lot of different ways to do that outside of just typical freight costs, which has been kind of what the logistics sector's been about for years.
All right, John, we'll put you back on. Want to ask you, you've been doing this a while. What has your biggest lesson been learned about managing real estate and facilities?
That's a great question, Jason. I'm really glad you asked me that. Well, I think I hit it on the last piece, which is, it's alignment. The team has expanded, as I described before. I think also, if you're thinking about a project or looking at, maybe we need to expand, maybe we just need to relocate this facility for whatever reason. Again, is don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. I think that's probably the biggest thing and the biggest mistake I see. People try to soldier things on, doing it themselves. There's a lot of great people. Again, I hit some of these relative to utilities and economic development groups and things like that have some fantastic resources that any one of the companies here in the room could and should be reaching out in leveraging. And I think that, I'm seeing some of our other, partners that we work with here in the room, whether it's architectural firms, engineering firms, these sort of things. If you've got an idea, something you think that can improve your process, can improve your business, it doesn't always have to come with a gigantic price tag associated with it if you have a little bit of time to be thoughtful and creative with solutions. And that's the thing. We see people get stuck, they run out of time, and that's what creates, really the disruption in their business and ultimately results in costing more money. So, the punchline is don't be afraid to reach out, get creative, because again, we see that the biggest lesson learned is trying to do too much by yourself and not really understanding where all these resources are that can help you, whether it's Chuck or whether it's Sam or whoever it happens to be. Don't be afraid to reach out.
That is a good message. We have pretty good rapport with the Wisconsin Economic Development, and they actually had me come speak to their annual meeting last year, and a number of the folks involved with that group, we talked with Central Wisconsin and other folks who have a number of food manufacturers. Jefferson County in Wisconsin had the Kikkoman development come. They were talking with us about it before it was publicly announced, and there's resources out there, like you say.
Yep, and somewhat familiar with the WEDC and their resources.
He happens to be married to the former deputy director of it, assistant vice president. I think that was her title.
Yeah. But WMC, another great organization that's a sister organization, of MWFPA. So again, don't hesitate to reach out. I think that's probably the biggest lesson learned.
That's why we're poaching another WMC guy. So, Chuck, I want to go back to you. We started out talking about the impact that AI has had in their respective areas, and I shared with the crowd. We just said that when we initially talked, I was surprised that you were seeing a big impact in HR and in safety, and what are you seeing? How is that impacting your realm?
Right. There's a couple different sides to this. In the HR departments, the technology and the software, the hiring processes, there's a lot of AI that can, you get 200 applications in, or you're trying to find applications. So there's this whole screening process that goes on with AI that says, who do you hire, who don't you hire, and there's a lot of cases working their way through the court system over do those things discriminate. It depends on what you put in and what parameters you put in, how you screen people out and make decisions about that. So there's questions, and there's been litigation over who should be the defendant, the employer or the creator of the software. So there's that whole aspect of that. But at the end of the day, a lot of this AI stuff becomes a personnel issue, an HR issue. So why am I talking about AI? Because the people who utilize the tools are the ones who are going to make mistakes or make decisions based upon those tools, or invade people's privacy or use data that they put into the public domain that then ultimately wipes away your trade secrets or your patent protections. And so it is essentially an effort in regulating the human use of AI in a way that protects your company from potential for liability. So if you just go out onto the internet and you say, okay, I'm going to use ChatGPT and I'm going to put in a bunch of data, and I'm an HR department, for example, and I want to study something about my personnel, I give it access to my HR files, and suddenly everybody's social security is out there, all of their private information. So personally identifiable, or PII, and private health information, personal health information, PHI, those are terms you need to understand and develop a acceptable use policy, AUP. So an AI AUP, these are the sort of terms of art here. And companies need to start looking at developing acceptable use that says to your personnel, this is what we allow you to use. This has been vetted. It's got privacy parameters. It will not put things out onto the World Wide Web that other people can get. And you can't use other AI other than this. It's got to be vetted, because what's happening is every department in your organization is looking at these AI tools. They're buying equipment that has AI built in, and it's all these unintended consequences of all this stuff coming in the back door that is AI enabled. But that AI then plugs into your data system, and it basically sucks all your company information, secrets, employee information out into the World Wide Web for all to see. And you could lose patent protections. You can lose a lot of cases on privacy invasion where employees have sued you for invading their privacy. On the other side, so that's kind of the HR software side. The hardware side is fascinating, but also a challenge, because we always had robotics out in the workplace, and I dealt with a lot of robotics issues early on as robots came in, and they're sitting out in the middle of a plant, and they're they're making all these movements, and somebody walks along and they get smacked by that thing, or picked up or thrown or crushed by the robotics. So now you see a lot of them are surrounded by these yellow interlock gates, and all is well. But now we're moving into untethered robots. And now you've got robots that are moving. You can't put a guard around them because they're moving within the plants. And a lot of these the food production, large manufacturing, are robotic systems that are untethered. They're moving like you would a forklift, but they're delivering product from one place to the other, just creating all kinds of interesting things about, do we any longer have to have horizontal manufacturing? Can we go back to vertical manufacturing that we had during the days of steam, because we now have robotics moving things? We don't have to have people necessarily, so that may change the way the envelope of manufacturing is. But for right now, it's the interaction between people and these robots that becomes a challenge. So, for example, you've got a robot that's it's programmed. If a person walks in front of it, it'll stop. It understands its place, location, and so forth, but it's interacting with people. So I stack the thing too high with stacks. It has to stop quickly. Do those stacks topple over onto somebody? So all kinds of unintended consequences. It all looks good when it's operating in a pristine environment, but then when humans are coming in or forklifts are coming in, there can be kind of a hiccup in that. But what's fascinating to me is the ability or the potential of AI to really make the workplace safer. So that, for example, one of the biggest challenges is lockout, tagout. Getting people to not go in, put their hands into a machine so that they are in a position to be trapped or crushed or caught. And so, you could walk up to a machine, and this is coming, and there's beta tests of this sort of thing. I can scan my QR code on the machine. It knows who I am because I've got a cell phone that tells them who I am. It knows what my capabilities are, what my qualifications, what my certifications, what my training is. Will it allow me to work on that machine? At the same time, I have all my lockout, tagout procedures. I can follow through that. I can document the steps that I've taken. If I have questions, it tells me who the subject matter expert. There's somebody in Brazil who knows everything about this machine. I can make that phone call if I have questions about what's going on. So this is the augmentation aspect. It's not necessarily AI, but I'm augmenting workers with intelligence, and the equipment and the people are communicating with each other in terms of knowledge base and what's involved with it. So it's a fascinating time to be in terms of the growth of this technology.
All right, last question. Sam,
Okay.
you shared a bit about Taylor Farms before, and wanted to ask you about what's been the lesson learned from shippers during the freight recovery period?
Yeah, I think this one goes alongside with what Chuck and John are all trying to say. It's planning, right? And as I mentioned, like, the freight markets are coming back. I think the businesses are really excited about their futures. And, what have all of the warehouses done? Learning so much from you guys. How have you guys planned for an increased volume and output from your sites? What have you done in terms of people safety? What have you done in terms of lowering your costs or, closing down some facilities to open new ones? What does all that mean for your business? And I think as the markets start to come back and we all look forward to an exciting future, it's all of that planning that's gone in place. Who are your partners in place to make your supply chain or your business more durable, more resilient? And to me, we have customers who are not in that space yet. They're still trying to find the right leaders to get them there. And then, of course, we have customers who have already planned ahead of time, and they're the ones who will have the ramp up and be able to really accelerate their own businesses and streamline efficiency and bring in all those different things that you guys are surely being asked around lowering your operating costs and becoming more efficient within the warehouse space or within your manufacturing sites in order to just boost that productivity to really get ready to reap the benefits of a better market.
Awesome. Sam, if people want to find you after this, where are you at?
Yeah, well, I have a couple colleagues here, and Steve Rose and Jack Weiss sitting right here at the table. We also have a booth over here in the far corner. Come find us. Let us know. Let's pick up a conversation. We'd love to understand, and I think that's where the conversation always starts.
And then Chuck and John, will you guys be here for a few minutes after?
Absolutely, yes.
All right. So, all right, folks, Chuck Palmer, Sam Martinez, John Wickman. Please give me a hand in thanking them.
Thank you.